So we'll start off with a little piece of Morning Sun. We'll go through a few pieces so you have a feel for who I am, and then we can talk after that. Francis Richard Davis left when I was 6, gone before I knew him. He abandoned my mom, brother, sister, and me in the early 1970s. He made it official with a phone call. I remember the neon yellow telephone cord stretching from the kitchen along the left side of my mom's closed bedroom door. With eyes fresh with tears of permanent loss, she hung up the phone and announced the news. Your father won't be coming back anymore. And then to my brother she said, you are the man now. It is your responsibility to be in charge. For those of you who've grown up in a single-parent household, you know that there are a couple of struggles. One is emotional, that you look to be part of something. And the other is economic, that it is a devastating economic impact. And watching my mom struggle, work as a school teacher at the public school in Colchester, and cut bread in the Colchester bakery was really impactful. So I had to work hard. I had to do physical labor as a kid. And I talk about in the book the sense of isolation. Before I ever got to Kingswood, I talk about it pretty candidly, and I'd like to read it to you. In the summers, I would mow the neighbor's grass and then stop to watch and listen to the cars drive by on Route 85. I felt so lonely, so trapped. I hoped that a car would stop and I would be discovered. I dreamt that a person would get out and take me with them, to Mystic, to California, to anywhere. But no cars ever stopped, except for those we'd pelt with rotten vegetables from my mother's garden. I'd restart the lawnmower, and the smell of gasoline exhaust and cut grass would fill my nose, and I would turn my back to the road that could have been my salvation, for it had turned its back on me. I knew, even from the time I was a kid, and certainly my mom knew, that the route out for me of the experience that I had as a kid and the way to have a better life than what my mom had had was through education. And that brought me into this room. In fact, it brought me into seat, as I remember, seat E103, which is just right over here. And sitting in seat E103, I remember the orientation in this school. My time at Kingswood was a time of struggle for me. I didn't feel that I belonged. And that's something that after I read to you today, I want to talk very honestly with you about. My sense is that some of you probably share that same feeling and same experience. But I want to talk with you about what it was like getting up each morning to come to this school 25 years ago. The contrast between my home life and that of the typical Kingswood student was striking. The winter months were the worst. Our house was not well heated or insulated, and we tried to use as little heating oil as possible due to its cost. Our main heat source in the winter was a coal stove in the living room. We could get the fire going by carrying wood up from the basement and letting it burn until the embers glowed red. Then we would return to the basement and shovel coal from the coal bin into a black metal bucket. The scraping of the shovel on the concrete floor could be heard throughout the house. It was a heavy carry up the creaking wooden stairs and through the kitchen to the living room. When the coal was shoveled into the stove, the fire would roar, and within minutes anyone in the room had to strip down to shorts and a t-shirt. Our dog Grimsby would move to another room. The crackle of hellfire could be heard inside the giant stove as the ancient plants, trapped for 100 million years, gave up their last life. The heat would rise and change the upstairs climate, but the rest of the house would remain cold. So cold that we would close the door to the garage-turned-family room to try to trap the heat in the rest of the home. On winter mornings, I'd wake up in the dark, often to the sound of my mom shoveling snow off the driveway, and head for the shower. Our furnace never produced enough hot water, but we could not afford a replacement. After an initial 20 seconds of warm water, the shower would turn ice cold. I'd stand with my back to the water, bracing with all my muscles tightened, the yellow dial soap barely lathering in the frigid water. I dried myself not with a thick Turkish towel like I'd seen in the Kingswood kids' homes, but with a cat hair-covered, threadbare little cloth that had been hung to dry on the basement clothesline next to the coal bin. Now smelling of coal dust, I would pick the cat hairs out of my mouth and hurry into the living room to dress next to the coal stove, where shivers would turn to sweat. At times I was surprised they even let me through the school doors in the morning. But I went on and then began to do work for Al Gore, both when he first ran for president in 1988 and then later when he was vice president of the United States. And so I talk about one of the scenes working for him when he was vice president, where he was just arriving at the Gridiron Dinner, which is the annual media roast of the president and vice president. And so the scene is waiting for the motorcade to pull up and then spending time with the president and vice president of the United States. Gore arrived a while later, and I stood with a site agent on the VP detail to greet the motorcade. He looked tired as he lumbered out of the back seat of the limousine. "How do you feel, sir?" "Well, I'm suffering from something we call circadian freefall right now," he replied in classic Al Gore fashion as we walked toward the holding room. Having learned the language over the past decade, I knew how to interpret. He had jet lag. The difference between Al Gore and Bill Clinton revealed itself a few minutes later when Clinton and Gore were seated at the head table in the banquet hall, and Jim, Mike, Major Mudd, and the rest of us were in the holding room. Clinton surprised us by walking into the holding room. We all stood up, as is the tradition when the president enters the room. Not recognizing Mike, even though he had worked for Clinton on the campaign, the president immediately moved toward him. Jim reintroduced them, and Clinton did the usual. The handshake, the left hand behind the upper part of Mike's right arm, pulling him close, the smile, the look directly into Mike's eyes. Then the big dog poured it on. He began the desperate attempt at connection that marks a natural, needing to be wanted, wanting to be needed. "Where are you from, Mike?" "Connecticut, sir." "Oh, did you watch the Yukon game today? That Danielle Marshall, he's amazing." Mike felt uncomfortable standing in front of us getting stroked by the master. So he broke eye contact and stepped back slightly to let a larger group of people into the circle. But Clinton would have none of it, because this wasn't about what Mike wanted. This was about what Bill Clinton needed. Then Clinton did something extraordinary. To remake eye contact with Mike, Clinton noticeably bent his knee and shifted his body downward. It was as if a train had derailed and was desperately feeling its way along, trying to reconnect to the track. Their eyes met again. Unwilling to let the target of his affections escape once more, the president worked even harder to form a lasting bond. Clinton gave the percentage of shots from the field Danielle Marshall had made during the Yukon game. Mike smiled and nodded, but wouldn't let it go further. We joked later that had Michael admitted to Clinton that he often served as the statistician and TV timeout coordinator at Yukon games, Clinton probably would have followed him home. All the good that ever happened in my life came because of this place. Right? And for me to stand up here and have this conversation with you, it's a tough conversation. But all the good that came because of this place. Right? There was one teacher who helped turn it around for me. She was terrific. She saw in the kid with, gangly teeth and skinny and hot waters and acne and everything else, she saw some native political skill, and she was supportive of that. And Dr. Ann Ciro is still here today at this school, and the lesson is this. For anybody who wants to leave, for anybody who feels isolated and disconnected from this place, the great irony is I thought I was the loneliest kid in the world. When we would gather for assemblies, I thought I was the only kid in this room going through this stuff. And lo and behold, years later, when I'd start to talk with people about their experiences, guess what? Everybody went through it. I mean, I felt that way because I was awkward, because I came from a single-parent home, came from a poor home. There were other folks who felt isolated for different reasons. And all I'm saying to you is, if you feel that you're on the fringe, if you feel a disconnect because you come from a single-parent home, you're not as wealthy, you're not as popular, because you're African-American, because you're Hispanic-American, because you're Native American, because you're gay, because you're lesbian, because of anything, guess what? We're the majority. We are the majority. And so the lesson to you, the lesson that I hope that you remember from these few minutes together, is that you are what matters.